In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can control a servo motor using a push button. When you press it, it goes 180 degrees and comes back to the location. Or it goes from 180 to 0 and comes back. Different types of code for controlling servo motor using push buttons because they are required in many applications. Also, I have a project that you can control a servo motor using push button. When you press the push button, the servo motor moves either from 0 to 180 and stops, or moves from 180 to 0 and stops. Also, I have a project that you can control a servo motor using push button. When you press the push button, the servo motor starts from 0 to 180 and returns back as long as you keep the push button pressed. When you release the push button, the servo motor will stop. Also, I have another project that you can control a servo motor using two push buttons. One push button to move the servo motor to the right, and the other push button will move the servo motor to the left. When you release the push button, the servo motor will stop. Also, I have a project that you can control 16 servo motors with different type of codes. You can get the code for this by clicking at the link below the video in the description, which will take you to robojax.com/learn/Arduino. Let me briefly explain the servo motor. Servo motor is a type of motor that the shaft can be controlled to move only 180 degrees or half a circle, something like that. And then you can control precisely where it should be between 0 and 180 degrees. There are also other types of servo motors that, for example, there is something called continuous servo, which I have the link below. It will rotate 360 degrees, and these are the most common one. And also you might get this type of servo motor, which is very heavy with high torque. It is the same way. It can go 0 to 180 degrees and it will stop. So this is MG966R version, and this is the metal gear. This is all metal, and this is a plastic gear. So this will be much cheaper, like 3 or 4 or 5 times cheaper than this. But in general, this is the operation. And so the servo motor has 3 wires. The darker wire is the ground. The 5 volts is always at the middle in case you make mistake in terms of connection in RC or car or airplane. So the middle is always 5 volts. And this is the signal. You might see it as a black wire on this side. Red is always red. And this side you might see white, but doesn't matter. So they're the same. Configuration is exactly the same: ground, 5 volts, and signal. Now let me explain the wiring. For the wiring, I'm using this push button here. The push button is of long pin type, 2 pins. It makes it easy. You can get it from eBay or Amazon. I have the link below this video. So the 2 pin of this push button is connected to the ground and to pin 2. So my push button is connected to these 2 pins. My servo, which has 3 wires, I've connected using this extra extension here to make it easy. Connect the brown wire to the ground of Arduino, the middle pin to 5 volts, and the signal wire, orange, to pin 2 in this case. And if you pay attention here, we have tilde at pin 3, sorry, and then tilde is here, 5, 6, and 9, 10, 11. These are all pulse modulation enabled pin. For example, 7 and 8 will not work, 4 will not work, so keep that in mind. Let me now explain the code. The code starts from here, include servo.h. You don't need to download anything. It's part of Arduino IDE. When you get the software, it's included. And then we get this class here and create an instance of it, and we call it my servo. This is our object. And then we define servo pen using define servo pen 3, and we define a pen that is pulse width modulation enabled in Arduino Uno or Arduino compatible boards. You will see this sign beside the pen. And then we define push button pen 2. Our pen 2 is connected, our push button is connected to this pen, and this is our initial angle, 90 degrees. But make sure that if you are setting it, set it not 0 or not 180, set it 1 degree lower, 1 or 179. And then angle step, this is a step where the value will increment from initial value. Now it's 10, so it will be 90, will 10, and then 100, 110, 20, 40. In increments of 10, it will increase or decrease. But if you wish, you can change it to 5 or even 1. But keep that in mind that it will take a longer time to go through all those steps, which I'm going to show you next if you want to speed it up. And this is the minimum angle and maximum angle. You can also have the option of keeping the servo within certain range, let's say from 0 to 90, or maybe 110 to 180, or any number. But keep that in mind, because this is minimum angle, this value must be smaller than this value, otherwise this code will not work. And here, constant integer type, we are defining a type. We can put either 1 or 2. If you put 1 value, it will go from 0 to 180 and comes back to 0. If you make it 2, it goes to the opposite. It starts from 180, it goes to 0 and comes back to 180, which I'm going to demonstrate. This value is holding the push button value when it is pushed. Do not change it. Inside the setup, from here to here, this happens only once. Serial.begin initializes the serial monitor. Serial monitor can be accessed by clicking at Tools, Serial Monitor, or pressing Control Shift and M, or on the right side here you can click, and this is the serial monitor, will open and will print this text. At the right side, at the lower corner, you will see this number. From here you can set the baud rate, 9600 baud or 9600 bit per second. This, if I close it, this is a value, it must match, otherwise you will not be able to read the value. My servo.attach, servo pen, this is as if I type 3 here, so pen 3 will be assigned to the servo. And pen mode push button pen, this is pen 2, this is as if I type 2, we have defined it here. We're defining this pen as an input, but I'm using also pull-up. The pull-up job is to eliminate usage of a resistor. When the button is not pressed, it always pulls it up or pulls it to 5 volts. I have a separate video explaining that. If you do not use this pull-up or you just use input, you need to use a resistor. And then serial.print, this just prints a text. You see the double quotation, so this is our text. And then my servo.write angle, you can put a value here and the servo moves to that location. Because this is inside the setup, this is our initial position of the servo. If you want to put any other value or something, just put here, the servo will be initially at that location. Inside the loop, we check the push button using digital read, push button pen, this is pen 2. So we read the value and compare it against the value of low using this comparison of 2 equal sign. And when push button is pressed, it will be low. If it is equal low, then it means this is true. Whatever is inside F, when it is true, then this will happen. What happens is we put 1 into the push button pushed value. So now this will have the value of 1 or true. And then here we check it. If push button push this true, do it equal 1, but that's excess. This was very simple. It will work perfectly. So if it is true, then what we do is we get the angle which we set above at 90, and this was 10. So 90 plus 10 is now 100, and it is stored in the angle. The same angle will be now updated. It's now 100. So later on in the code, the servo will move to 100 degrees. and we check if angle is greater or equal to maximum angle. Let's say you set it 180, because it will increment. We will have some point that it goes above 180, it goes 190. So we want to make sure if it is equal or greater, then we have to make sure that we go backward, meaning angle, we put angle step with a negative. Now, when this value is negative, let's say this was 90 and this is negative 10, it will be 80. So now it will go in the reverse. So this changes the direction of rotation of servo. And here the type, if type is equal 1, this two equal sign means compare. Make sure don't put 1. So if it is equal 1, then push button will be 0, which means the push button is not pressed, and this thing will not happen. The whole action will not happen, which I'm going to show you. And if the value is smaller than angle, again we will change the direction. If the type is 2, then push button is equal 0. Here we check if push button is pushed. That's why we said we update it. When you make it 0, it will be false. Otherwise, now it is true, then my servo right angle, the angle which is 100 or whatever value is, the servo will move, and also this will print it for us on the screen. So on the serial monitor, and there is 100 millisecond delay. We give it enough time for the servo to move. If you need fast action, reduce this until you see that the servo can move, because the characteristic of each servo will be different. So this is the delay that we have between each movement, and the loop will continuously take action and doing the same thing. Now let me demonstrate it. I'm opening the serial monitor here. The code has been loaded to the Arduino Uno board, and here if I press the reset button, the code will load again, as you can see. Now initially it is set at 90, so the servo is at 90. When I press and release, it goes to 180 and stop. So this is in type 1. So let me show you. At the moment this is set to type 1, and it goes to 0 and comes back to 180. Now if I press it again, you will see it goes and comes back. And here if I go now, you can see it was at 0, it was at 180. So it went from 180, it went 170 up to 0, and then back to 180. So this is when you put in type 1. And here if we change it to type 2 and upload the code, now when I press it, it goes to 180 and back to 0, 180 and back to 0. From now on, every time it goes from 0 to 180 and to 0. So if the initial value that you don't like it at 90, put it at 179 or put it at 1 degree. It will be always in that location. If you learned something and found this useful, please thumb up, as this will help my video in the search algorithm of YouTube. If you have comment or question, post it in the comment section below. If you are a subscriber of my channel, I always try to answer and reply. If you want to get updates of my upcoming videos, make sure to subscribe. Or control them one by one. Or just control, for example, 5